All right. Acts chapter 19, right? Holly? 28 or so?
20.
Did we finish all of 19?
19 points.
Huh?
You have chapter 19, you want to make some points.
I do want to make some points. Good. The reason that I know that is I don't flip to the beginning of my notes. So I'm sitting here staring at page 7 out of 10 out of 10. So I figured there's something I didn't say. So let's catch up real quick. We are all the way back here to this. This is a succinct way of, in my mind, of straightening out one of the great, I don't know what you want to call it, distortions in the way that we often think about the New Testament and the Old Testament for that matter. And everybody who's been here for a while has heard this too many times to count. They're probably getting tired of it. But most modern Protestants think in terms of this individualistic vertical line. How is a man or woman, a person, justified before God? And what you're going to find in the New Testament, if you try to apply that way of thinking to the New Testament, you're going to get vertigo a lot. You're going to be forcing a lot of square pegs into round holes because they just they weren't quite in that mindset. And it's back to something, a word the pastor used, Pastor Don in the back there, used a couple of weeks ago, anachronism. One of the way an anachronism is projecting onto the past elements of your own thought or habit or cultural mores or any of that sort of thing. Culture or values, yeah. And so I'll give you a good example of that. In Campus Crusade, when I was on staff, we had a little booklet, and you know, the first point of the book was that God loves you and offers a wonderful plan for your life. It depends on how you define wonderful. Some people may not define it wonderful, but anyway, the first bullet point has John 10:10 attached to it. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. And then there's a little parentheses. The little booklet is going to help you out and interpret John 10:10 for you. By abundantly, parentheses, that is full and meaningful. I came that they might have a full and meaningful life. As if the meaning of life was something that first century Jews in Palestine were struggling with. I question whether first century Jews in Palestine struggled with the meaning of life. The problem was the reality on the ground didn't match their understanding of the covenant and God's promises. That was the problem. But to imagine that Jews were walking around wondering about the meaning of life as if it was disconnected from God's covenant with Abraham and what he had been doing for the last, that's just not understanding the way these people were. Anyway, that's an anachronism. We do it a lot. And so this right here would be an anachronism in my mind as well. We are very, very intensely focused on an individualistic approach to understanding ourselves and God and the church and even the church. I mean, we're post-enlightenment individualists. And so this the corporate element gets just simply forgotten. And when you're reading Gospels and Acts narrative, any narrative in the Bible, you're going to see the answers to these. You're going to see these kinds of questions being addressed. What has God been doing, and what is he doing now? And lately, for example, in Acts, in retrospect to the cross and the resurrection, who are the people of God? As this gospel proclamation advances past Judea and Jerusalem, where's Jerusalem? There it is, up to Samaria, crossing the Great Divide. And then later in chapter 10, that's in chapter 8, right here. And then in chapter 10, up to Gentile territory in Caesarea. And then through eventually the ministry of Paul, it pushes out to the north and northwest on the first journey. And we see actually he took the water, but we see it move into Galatia and probably into maybe Cilicia as well, which is where Paul's originally from. And then in the second journey, we see that advance push across Asia, not in Asia, but across Asia to Macedonia and Achaia, depending on how you say it. And then touches land in Ephesus, and then back to Jerusalem. And then finally, on this third journey, which is the one that we are talking about in chapter 20 and 19 and 20, we see the move back to Ephesus and then the gospel spreading throughout Asia. So that's the progress. That's what I would call the Hellenistic advance. Hellenistic because we're talking about the advance of the gospel into Greek-speaking Gentile territory from Palestine and then up through Antioch, which we've talked about how the sort of center of the outreach moves from Jerusalem to Antioch on the first and second journeys, and then on the third journey to Ephesus. And then Antioch gets left behind as well. And then it spreads throughout Asia, which is where we are now in chapter 19. Worlds are colliding, worldviews are colliding and crashing into each other. And one worldview is giving way to another, which upsets the cultural forces that are invested in that worldview. So we have these three mutually contradictory forces crashing into each other. Hellenistic Judaism, so Greek-speaking Jews that have synagogues all over the place here. Greco-Roman paganism, so Greek paganism that was handed down to the Roman to the Roman culture, which so you have Greco-Roman culture, and now you have Hellenistic Christianity, which has arrived, and these three forces are crashing into each other, which is creating all sorts of conflict and trouble between the three. And so that's where Paul finds himself. He's at the crossroads, really, of all three of these, particularly in Ephesus. So he's going to generate enemies in Ephesus on both sides. He's going to be chased out of the synagogue at the beginning, I think, of chapter 19. And he's going to take his disciples and he's going to move to secular territory, what is called the school of Tyrannus, to teach instead of the synagogue. And then eventually it's going to cause such a commotion that it's beginning to upset the economic interests of these Greco-Roman cultures. We've already seen it before with that slave girl in Philippi earlier on the third journey. Second journey, excuse me. Now we're seeing it again with the great temple Artemis and the economic infrastructure now and financial interests that infuse the cult of Artemis or Diana. And that's what's going on right now. So all these forces on the ground happening, and then you have this masterpiece, as I've called it, of redemptive artistry as the gospel, as the gospel continues to move like a cloud throughout these areas dominated by Greco-Roman paganism and then dotted with Hellenistic Judaism in the synagogues. And Paul is the lightning rod for that. Thank you. That's correct. That's a summary. That's catching you up on 3 months worth of this Sunday school class. So.
Poor speaker that takes that long to say that.
I know, it's 9:31. We did that in about 6 or 7 minutes. It pays every once in a while to encapsulate large, you're studying the section and it helps to put that section in the context of what it's built from, and you continue to do that. Maybe we'll do a test pretty soon. We'll go back all the way to chapter 1 and you'll have to summarize the subject matter of every chapter and maybe summarize the subject matter of every chapter in Acts. I'm a big believer in that. There's no substitute for knowing subject matter.
That's what we did in the team class.
Yeah.
We studied a book and they memorized
Chapter titles.
chapter titles.
Yeah, it's embarrassing sometimes, but yeah, Brian caught me on a couple of names a little while ago. There's so many names. We're going to get into this a little bit this week or next week about all the names that Luke throws down of places and people and why he might do that, particularly on the third journey, which is where it's the most prolific. Okay, so let's summarize some stuff here. We are in chapter 19. Key statement right here in 21, we talked about this. Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. So he's on the third journey, and he is currently here. Where is he? Wait a minute. Is that right? Yes. He is currently in Ephesus. And on the eve of this commotion, this chaos that's about to ensue in the theater in Ephesus, there's this foreboding almost statement that Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. And of course, the last time that someone purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem, he was crucified. In Luke 9:51, the phrase used, not that all that different from this one, and certainly the sentiment is almost exactly the same. But so this commotion, this chaos that's ensuing follows immediately after this statement about heading to Jerusalem. So that's the setup. Then we have the businessmen led by this man that Luke names, Demetrius. Once again, why Luke names who he names and doesn't name who he doesn't name is one of the great mysteries that's reserved for the great press conference in the sky that hopefully we get. Why did you name Demetrius, but you didn't name, this other person? I still want to know. Okay, anyway, we got that statement earlier that somebody can help me out here, where the gospel has gone all over Asia. Where is it at? It's up there somewhere. Now we get this statement from Demetrius. Maybe is that it right there? I should probably read this more closely before I start teaching it. And almost all, oh yeah, the word of God had spread throughout Asia earlier. That's the verse 10, yeah. So you have Luke saying it. Everyone who lived in Asia heard the word of God. Luke says it, and this happens a lot in Luke and Acts. Luke says it, then Luke has an enemy of the gospel say it, which is interesting. It's a similar phenomenon to, the demons are the ones who say to Jesus, who announce that Jesus is son of David or son of God, or however it's said a couple of times. But the biblical authors will have the forces of the enemy, pronounce these very, very important statements of truth or theme. And there's another one. So Demetrius is feeling it in the pocketbook, if you will. And so are the other businessmen, and they don't know what to do about it, because we've talked about how the religious interests, the religious culture of Greco-Roman paganism was all tied up with financial and economic interests. And so, we got the same thing going with sports now, like this big argument about college sports and how infected it is with financial interests. And once it gets that way, you can't undo it. There's nothing you can do about it. And that's where it is with these people. And so I highlight in whatever color that is, all the statements which imply or state chaos. This is what biblical authors do when they want to make a point. They get really redundant. They get repetitively redundant in a very repetitive manner. And that's what you're seeing here. And so he's building this picture of total and complete chaos. Let's see if I. Yeah, so here's the theater. We looked at this last week. Here's the theater, still there. Some images of it. That's the theater in Ephesus, holds 25,000 people, they estimate. And so this is what the disciples are up against now. And so the Jews are going to put forward this Alexander. So that the Romans, cultural Greeks, don't like the Jews because the Jews make no pretense about their opinions of pagan idolatry. And so the Greeks of the day, there was a very pronounced anti-Jewish sentiment among these Greek populations, because the Jews have their synagogue there, and they know what that is, and then the Jews don't want anything to do with them, so far as to not even go in their houses or eat a meal with them. And so now, they're just furious at Paul. But Paul, to the Greeks of that time, I don't know that the Christianity part of Paul was really all that big a deal. It was the fact that they knew that Paul was a Jew. And so these Jews are trying to separate themselves from Paul and say, hey, we had nothing to do with this commotion or what's going on in Asia right now. We just want to live in peace with you people. And the Greeks are kind of like, that's not your history from their perspective. And so the Jews do something not very intelligent. They put forward a Jew to defend them in the theater in front of all these angry pagans. So the angry pagans are going to see this Jew. They don't want to hear what he has to say. They just want to smear Artemis in the Jew's face, right? They just want to smear the Greek goddess that the Jews hate in the face of this Jew. So it just makes things worse. And that's what helps to make this erupt into total chaos. So let's go ahead and read through this, and then I'll say a couple of things and we'll move on. When they heard this, they were filled with rage about what Paul was doing. They began crying out, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. The city was filled with confusion. They rushed with one accord into the theater, dragging along two of Paul's disciples from Macedonia. When Paul wanted to go into the assembly, the disciples would not let him. Good move. Also, some of the Asiarchs, who would be probably the chief citizens of Asia, who Paul had apparently made inroads with, sent to him and repeatedly urged him not to venture into the theater, probably because they know what sort of person Paul is. And so, they're trying to calm the situation down, not inflame it more. Some were shouting one thing and some another. That's a great statement. If you're looking for maybe the only scene of comedy in the entire New Testament, this would be the one. As you imagine Luke, we're not in a we section. Are we in a we section? No, we're not in a we section. But if you can imagine Luke sitting in this theater watching this chaos over nothing, because Paul didn't do anything, as the town clerk's going to say in a minute. And the way he describes it, it's a chaos for no reason, and it's out of some sitcom where a fight erupts in a bar and nobody knows why the fight started. They're just fighting. The assembly was in confusion. The majority did not know for what reason they had come together. So he defines confusion, which is also something that biblical authors do a lot. Some concluded it was Alexander, since the Jews had put him forward. Not a good move. Motioned with his hand, Alexander was intending to make a defense to the assembly, a defense of the Jews. We didn't do this. When they saw that he was a Jew, they didn't care about anything else. A single outcry arose from them all as they shouted for about 2 hours, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And there it is. They're gonna let this Jew know what they think of his monotheism. And they're gonna smear Artemis in his face. After quieting, here comes the town clerk. Town clerk would be the mediator, the responsible guy between the civic authorities and the Romans. If Ephesus being the chief city of Asia, commercial center, it's also where the Romans were. So there's the Romans somewhere near. There's what appears to be a riot about to erupt. So this town clerk knows that what's at stake here. So he steps in. No, the Asiarchs say, no, Paul, this is not your job to stop this. We'll handle this. The town clerk picks his moment. He goes out front. Then he starts talking. Men of Ephesus, what man is there, after all, who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of the image which fell down from heaven? Let's not get into that right now. So he reaffirms the paganism of their culture, right? He sides with them. So since these are undeniable facts, actually they're very deniable, as Demetrius had just said a little while ago. You ought to keep calm and do nothing rash. But you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of our goddess. We can't find anything to charge them with in regard to our temples. There's no crime being committed. So then, if Demetrius and the craftsmen who are with him have a complaint against any man, the courts are in session and proconsuls are available. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you want anything beyond this, it will be settled in a lawful assembly. Roman law, Pax Romana, is backed up with military force. We only solve these problems in the lawful assembly. For indeed, we are in danger of being accused of a riot in connection with today's events. And who's going to do the accusing? The Romans will. Since there is no real cause for it, And in this connection, we will be unable to account for this disorderly gathering. So just when you might expect, if you're making this story up, the great apostle to stand up and give a magnificent gospel presentation to 20 or 25,000 or however 10,000, however many Greeks were there, presentation to these people, he dismissed the assembly. And it's over. So you can't make this stuff up. It's just so strange.
This reminds me of the old westerns that we used to see, like Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
And they'd want to hang a man.
Yeah, the vigilante
And they'd
thing.
get these these guys go in and break him out of jail, bring him out and hang him. And Marshall Dillon would stand out. He would be the guy making sense here. He would come out and say, now, wait a minute, we have laws here. Let's do it by the law, but they want him because they're boisterous and many to take him out and hang him out. Isn't that the way a lot of arguments go? Is the one who is the stronger will bring up the crowds, and has most people, and will cause a ruckus when there is a quiet way or a legal way or a better way to take care of these problems.
It's like that TV show applies to everything. Constantly bringing up Gunsmoke, man.
Why, has it been brought up before?
I bring it up all the time. That's Gunsmoke is my all-time favorite Western. I looked to buy it a few years ago. It's like $400 or $500 to buy the whole.
Yeah.
So
20 some odd seasons.
yeah. Well, the first 10 years, the first 10 seasons aren't even Gunsmoke. They're Marshall Dillon, Matt Dillon. They're black and white Matt Dillon.
Yeah.
Half an hour.
What they call it.
Okay, we're on to before we move on to John Carpenter's The Thing. Let's get back to the Bible. All right.
Sorry.
So what is this? What is this doing here? I think I've already hit one reason. It's the case in point, the demonstration. The way that you know that the gospel has made inroads all over Asia is this scene right here. It is the last straw. They can't. It's gone so far with the Hellenistic advance that the local interests, economic, political, religious, simply can't take it anymore. That's how far it's gone. And it happens at the end of the third journey in time. And so it's kind of been building, right? Like I said, this advance has gone from Galatia, right here, South Galatia, to Macedonia and Achaia. And now finally, after Paul gets back there, all of Asia. But this is the first time that you ever see phrasing in the sense of all of Asia, all of Asia heard the word. He's upsetting all of something. You haven't heard that before. You've seen, like I've said before, and like I showed you in this picture of the divisions, if you will, in Acts, where the word of God continues to spread and so forth. Well, now after 1920, and it grows mightily and prevails, this story appears to show the consequence of the gospel prevailing mightily in Asia. It causes this very nearly a riot in the leading city of Asia.
Isn't this an example of how the gospel works in a personal life? When it comes into our lives, it upsets us socially, it upsets us economically, it upsets everything. It comes in and it has to affect all of our life, or it's no gospel at all.
But not necessarily right at the beginning.
Right. Oh, correct. I agree with that.
I mean, there's people that
It took you three journeys to get this.
you're gonna encounter things when I mean, some of your crises from becoming a Christian might not occur for 30 or 40 years.
Absolutely. But it still happens. That's my point.
I'd like to say, saying all Asia is probably not saying every single person.
I agree with that.
places in Asia. And I think a great example of that is Colossae. Paul never went to Colossae. He wrote a book to the Colossians.
He never went to Colossae that we see in Acts.
He never went to Colossae
How do you know that?
because you find him writing, talking about the church.
Because I was going to bring that up next week. He brings,
Oh, he had been to, there you make a good point, because he'd been to Philemon's house.
yes. He know this thing between Philemon and Onesimus on the other side with Paul in between, that had a context. And when he writes that letter and you look at the farewells at the end, he seems to be intimately acquainted with that church. He'd say hello to the church in your house. You know, there seems to be this familiarity with it. And Laodicea. So I don't know. I'm just saying, I'll say
He
this.
wrote a letter to Laodicea. It might be a letter to Ephesians.
Yes. Yep, it could be. But I'll go back to it. There's no recorded trip to Colossians in Acts. This is where F.F. Bruce is really good. He finds these little statements which you go, oh, that's why that must have been some way, but it's not in Acts, it's in something else. There's no recorded trip to Colossae, and there's no mention of Titus in the whole book of Acts.
Right.
Titus is in Corinth maybe this whole time. And Titus has been a companion and a fellow servant with Paul since the beginning, because he's going to be mentioned as somebody that Paul took with him up to the council in Jerusalem in Galatians chapter 2, which would have been, in my view, right after the first missionary journey.
I don't think he
So-
took him to the council.
That's what he says.
The council, no, he took him to Jerusalem, didn't take him to the council. Council, we had this discussion before, and you mentioned how Bruce pointed out that if Galatians wasn't written early, that in Paul, that Acts talks about
Yeah.
him going to Jerusalem once, and then later he goes to the council in 15. So he didn't take him to the council, he took him.
Well, I'm not talking about the council in 15. I'm sorry, bad terminology. Whatever this thing was that Paul went to in Galatians chapter 2, and I do think they're different, he took Titus with him as a test of whether these apostles were going to try to have Titus circumcised as a Greek, and they didn't. But anyway, the point is Titus was there early, but he's never mentioned in Acts. It's the strangest thing. I mean, he wrote a letter to him.
He was in Greek.
Only reason we know about Titus is because his offhand mentions in 2 Corinthians and Galatians. But other than that, we never would have heard from him.
In the letters.
Yeah, in the letter to Titus, yeah. So, okay, anyway. Yeah, I take your point. Even when you don't know it, the gospel, it may seem to compromise with you, and so if it doesn't, it just, it gets its way eventually. It just can take a while. Okay, so we need to look at that. All right, what else we got here? Sorry about that. Quickly, Asiarchs. Okay, so that's the first reason I think, if I'm looking for reasons why this story is here, it's not because it's really interesting. Lots of interesting things happened on the second, third journeys that we never got to read about, one of which is what happened to Titus. I'll say, first of all, that it is the evidence, it is the climactic result of the commotion that the Hellenistic advance was causing all over Asia. And it happens in Ephesus, where Paul had been for 3 years. I think it's 3 years. So that's one. Number two, the innocence of Paul. You're going to see this a lot. You saw this a lot in Luke with regard to Jesus, where the narrative testifies to Jesus' innocence, in my view, to paint the picture of Isaiah chapter 53, the lamb led to slaughter, silent before his shears and all that. There was no wrong in him, kind of thing. But you'll see in Luke, you're going to see Jesus' innocence testified to by Pilate, labored on by Pilate, Herod, when Pilate sends Jesus to Herod, the criminal who's crucified with Jesus, the centurion standing there, Truly, this man was innocent. Again, you have a Roman giving the epitaph, the vivid, the strikingly graphic portrayal of Jesus' fulfillment of Isaiah 53 that comes out of the mouth of a Roman centurion. Truly, this man was innocent. And now with Paul, you see it, you saw it at Philippi, where he gets arrested and thrown in jail, and the civic authorities have to come out and testify to his innocence by he makes them escort him publicly out of the city, but he doesn't even leave the city on their timetable. He says, no, I'm going to go visit these people first. It's like you can almost picture them waiting outside in this uncomfortable moment. Then he leaves the city. And then there's Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia, who drives the Jews from the judgment seat, from the tribunal, because he doesn't want to get involved in their religious disputes. And he doesn't see that Paul's broken any laws. And so he drives him away. And now for the third time, in this gigantic uproar, you see this town clerk is the one who testifies to the innocence of Paul. They've done nothing wrong. He could have just caved. He could have just caved and arrested them and made these people happy. But Roman law. We're not going to do that. Not to mention the fact that Paul's a Roman, plus whoever else is there. And I think there were more than one Roman. There was more than just Paul and Silas who were Romans in that band. But that's for another day. But anyway, this also foreshadows, you had the statement above about heading to Jerusalem. Now you have, which is forbidding, because we know what's going to happen there. Now you have this commotion from among the Greeks, and then you're going to have the final, what do you want to call it? Last testimony to the Ephesians when he comes back through Macedonia, comes back down again, and you're going to have that statement, which is forbidding as well. So it's all kind of growing. This tension is growing, that what awaits Paul is conflict and suffering, these kinds of things. So that's what I think it's doing there. You should always answer that question. What's this doing here? That's what I think. That is chapter 19. Anybody want to say anything about that? Okay, so look at all that red or pink or whatever you want to call it there.
Still have concerts and
You do?
listening to a guy who's an archaeologist who talked about his traveling through the world. He went to a concert in that very amphitheater. He says, really wonderful because you understand how they're genius when it comes to their acoustics, and you can hear the music better in that thing, because they could put all those people in there and somebody could stand on stage and talk in a normal voice. And
Yeah, look at this.
It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, the
You go back to
acoustics.
that, you should go back to that theater and actually hear a concert. You can't hear Paul because he's long gone.
Got no microphones, right? They have no microphones. If you're,
It's harder to hear outdoors.
What?
Oops. Look at those. There's some people sitting there. But, if you're standing here addressing the assembly, they could hear you all the way up here.
How much you want to bet the people at the top are spying on the people at the bottom are talking about?
Yeah, that's one of the things that you would do, right? Hey, run down there and talk as low as you can, and we'll see when we can't hear you anymore. But it would be interesting to see how loud you had to talk for the people in the whole stadium to hear you.
The steps look steep too.
Yeah, let's see if we can. It's hard to tell.
Notice there's
Well,
no
it's
green.
like, you know how it's set up is like the, any stadium, like the Mission, basketball court, yeah. It's very steep,
Yeah, they had no microphones.
and so that's steep angle allows it
Oh,
to
the sound.
go around.
That's cool. If you think that's cool, then it's cool. If you don't think it's cool, then you're wrong. So, all right. So we're going to turn the page now.
Wow.
What was that for?
For being amazed at the theater,
Okay, it was a little delayed.
it takes a while.
Okay. All right, so you look at all the color highlighting the commotion, the riotous nature of this thing, which the town clerk simply diffuses. And everybody goes their own way. And then Paul is allowed to continue. You turn the page into the next chapter and you see more. After the uproar had ceased. So that's Luke's epitaph on it. It was the uproar. We're on again, but basically the journey is over. So like I've said before, the third missionary journey really is Paul's time in Ephesus. You can call it a journey, but you're not going to see Paul go from here to here to here to here like you do in the second journey and the first and second journeys, where he goes through Galatia, and then the second one he goes through Macedonia and Achaia. Here he's just in Ephesus. But he wasn't expelled. Luke is quite straightforward about that. It simply ceased. Paul is still there. He sent for the disciples. So he was not expelled from the city. Okay. After the uproar had ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and we're going to find out who they are. When he had exhorted them and taken his leave of them, he left to go to Macedonia. And when he had gone through those districts and had given them much exhortation, he does a lot of exhorting in this chapter. In fact, he exhorts the whole chapter. He came to Greece, and there he spent 3 months. And when a plot was formed against him by the Jews, that's foreshadowing for what's coming in Jerusalem, in my opinion. As he was about to set sail for Syria, of course, the reason you'd go to Syria, why does he mention? He's about to set sail for Syria. Syria is Antioch, and then maybe down to Jerusalem. So he's on the eve of going back to Jerusalem. There's a plot against him by the Jews. So it's foreshadowing, in my view. Yeah, it's all the time. It's the phrases. He says something like that, I think, in the book of Ephesians, and I'll go back to it. I think it was Ephesians. I've got a bookmark somewhere. He decided to return through Macedonia. So he was going to make a beeline. I don't really know what a beeline is. But he, if he was in Greece, he's down here, maybe from Kenkre, he's going to just basically sail back to Seleucia, port city for Antioch, and then head down to Jerusalem. Say hello to the disciples in Antioch, and then head down to Jerusalem. I don't know. That was the plan. He changed his plans with these various and sundry plots that are going on. And now he's simply going to turn back around, and he's going to head back up through Macedonia to Philippi, where he's going to pick up Luke, the author, head over to Troas, where we get a story. He's going to stay for 7 days, and then he's going to take these coasting vessels. He's going to pick them up here in this port city right here on the other side, but they're going to take these coasting vessels down, make a stop in Miletus, I don't know, where he's going to talk to the Ephesian elders, and then he's going to come straight back to Palestine. But essentially the trip, as far as the narrative is concerned, the trip is more or less concluded. He was accompanied by, and then there's this list of people, Sopater of Berea. Berea is in Macedonia. Wish that was 2 screens. Berea's up here. Berea was the good church. Berea was the place he fled to from Thessalonica, where they were giving him a hard time. Let's do it this way. Aristarchus, let's see. Look at them. The names are in green. The places are in yellow or whatever color that is. So look at the names. Sopater, Aristarchus, Secundus, Gaius, Timothy, Tychicus, or Tuchicus, Trophimus. Those are the names that he gives. And the places are Macedonia, Berea. Oh, I forgot about Pyrrhus, the father. He even mentions the father of Sopater. Why? I don't know. The Thessalonica, Derba, which is in Galatia, which is Timothy was from Lystra. And then, of course, the disciples Tychicus and Trophimus from Asia. Trophimus, remember that name. He's going to go, he's going to accompany Paul into Jerusalem, and he's going to be a major factor in the events that transpire that are going to cause Paul to get arrested and go to Rome in a way that he never thought, that he had no idea he was going to go to Rome in these circumstances. Anyway, Asia, Troas, Philippi, and then back to Troas in the narrative. And so Luke just unloads all this local color, this detail about places and people. And of course, the reason is right there in verse 6. We sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread and came to them at Troas within 5 days. And there we stayed at 7 days. So it's very detailed. Why? Because the author of the Chronicle is now part of the party, and he's probably keeping a diary. And so he unloads on us. There's going to be more reason than that. I'll get to in a minute. But so if you remember, the last time there was a we section, this is the second one. Where did the we section end? When did Luke switch from we to them and they and so forth? Remember what city he was in? Philippi. He was in Philippi on the second journey. Paul goes through Macedonia. He gets to Philippi. Suddenly it's we again. So he picks up Luke, who apparently has been in Philippi this whole time. And he's going to accompany Paul back to Jerusalem. And so remember, Paul's original intent was to go straight from probably Corinth, I think, to Jerusalem by way of Antioch. With I don't know who, but now because of this unintended trip through Macedonia, he's going to be taking Trophimus, at least Trophimus and Luke with him. And Trophimus is going to be important to the story. So once again, these unintended journeys have far-reaching consequences. And this is a good example of it.
Is Luke's name up there?
No, Luke is never
So
mentioned
he
in
inserted himself as
we. Luke is never mentioned in the book of Luke. There's a tantalizing, one of the great archaeologists, William Albright. Did I get that right? Albright. Is it William? I don't remember. British archaeologist thinks that Titus, the reason Titus is not mentioned is that Titus is Luke's brother. And there's this tantalizing, I don't know whether that's true or not, but there's a tantalizing statement in, I forget which book, about Titus and the brother, where the brother isn't named. And you just wonder who this brother is. You know, his brother, I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter, but it's the sort of thing that I like to get sidetracked on for too long. So I'll get back to the narrative.
Like he doesn't want to be the focus. He's just a part.
Then biblical authors are notorious for not mentioning themselves in the narrative. Mark never does, although a lot of people, including me, think he was the disciple who ran away naked at the end. Pastor probably, and I agree, believes that the disciple whom Jesus loved was John. John, the apostle, is never mentioned in the book of John. I think that's true. The John is not modified. It's John the Baptist, and he never adds the Baptist. I think it's just John. And John, the apostle, is never mentioned.
Like the one who leaned back.
Matthew is never mentioned in Matthew. Matthew is called Levi. No, I don't remember. Maybe he is.
Yeah, it's called Levi.
I don't remember if that's in Luke or Matthew. But anyway, Luke is never mentioned in Luke or Acts.
Basically Luke's name. See that statement doesn't, when you say he isn't mentioned.
Luke's name is never used in the book of Luke or the book of Acts. Of course,
He is mentioned.
he never knew Jesus, so he does not appear in Luke. And you got to wonder where Paul was during all of those events, because he was in Jerusalem, probably. Anyway, that's another sidetrack. Thank you. Let's get back to the narrative. We got 7 minutes to go.
Want to talk about Gunsmoke?
Then we can talk about Tombstone, 1957 to 60, which is very similar to Gunsmoke. Stop it. Okay, this is the third time, I believe, fourth time, that you've seen this. You have, let's go with names. This is the third time you've seen this collection of names. The first one was in Acts chapter 6 with the church in Jerusalem when they appointed the Hellenistic leaders of the church to solve the problem between the Hellenists and the Hebrews. Remember that scene? And there was the list of the 7 disciples. They listed all 7 of them. And it closed with the guy from the proselyte from Antioch. Extra credit if you remember his name. Who was the proselyte from Antioch that anticipated the mission from Antioch in Acts chapter 6? Nicholas. Nicholas was the Antiochian. That's going to be on the test too. Acts 13, on the eve of the first missionary journey in talking about Antioch, you had Barnabas, Simeon, Niger, Lucius, and Manaen, or something like that. And he lists those names associated with Antioch. Now, here, he goes through another list of, it's like a fulfillment. If you ask why all the names and places and people, well, remember Acts chapter 2. You have all these Hellenistic Jews from all over the empire in Jerusalem and proselytes. So the narrative goes from chapter 2, it goes like this, and then over the course of Acts, back out again. And now you see this evidence. Just a minute ago, you've been talking about how all Asia had heard the word of God. And now you're seeing this explosion of names and people. Paul has collected all these disciples from all over the region. He's got Galatia, so you got Gaius from Derbe, Timothy from Lystra. Those are both Galatia. You have Tychicus and Trophimus from Asia, Thessalonica, and Berea. Is there a Philippi? There's no Philippi there. That's Macedonia. You don't see Corinth represented. I don't know why, which would be Achaia or Greece. But I think that's what's going on here. It's just one of those places where Luke assesses how significant has been the spread of the word of God, that Paul, over the course of this time, has collected companion ministers from all over the eastern part of the empire.
This may sound weird. Are they all speaking the same language?
Yes, they are. They're all speaking Greek. So he just gave me the opening that I needed to show my super terrific, fantabulous graph. Whoops. I'm so proud. That's right. You know how difficult it is to get this all done with a black font and a white background, and then switch it to a black background and a white font? And now that I've done that, if I ever want to print it out, I have to go back and do the whole thing again on another copy and switch it back.
Just save it and then.
I-
You'll have 2 copies?
I know that now,
Oh.
but I don't know of any, maybe you do, I don't know of any easy way to select every single object and change the color of the font.
I would print the PDF, bring it into a photo editor,
What?
and just invert the color.
But when you bring it back to Word,
Right. It'd just be an image. It wouldn't be
Okay.
selectable.
Yeah, okay. but I could still do it and use it that way. Yeah,
Yeah, you can use it that way.
Because it's permanent. It's perfect now.
it is, yes, it is the perfect. It is I've been mastering the timeline. I am the keeper of the knowledge of the timeline. And I have been mastering timelines. My whole life has been dedicated to this moment right here where I finally achieved the perfect.
So why don't
You
actually talk
regret
about
that.
So let's actually,
You regret that.
no, so let's actually talk about the perfect timeline here. So this is kind of the Hellenistic advance that I'm talking about. if I was going to characterize the point of Acts, you got the statement in 1:8 from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth, which can be roughly in the narrative, what's the word, quantified by Jerusalem, Antioch, Ephesus, Rome. In the narrative, in my view. You add what you really have there is the advance of the gospel through Hellenistic territory, the Hellenistic territory of the Roman Empire. And so you'll see where, 2 minutes, you'll see where the Hellenism, which is to say, in part, the language, the Greek language, handed down, gifted, taken over by so the Romans took basically the Greek Empire, not from the Greeks. There's a lot happened between the 300s and the early 1st century BC. But eventually, the empire that the Romans had roughly, I think, as far as our interests in it are concerned, roughly corresponded to the Greek Empire. And it was a Greek-speaking populace. And so Paul could travel everywhere, anywhere, and not only talk to Greeks, he could do it in Hellenistic synagogues with Greek-speaking Jews and Greek-speaking Gentile proselytes and God-fearers. And that was the raw material, that was the fertile ground on which the success of this mission happened. And we can talk more about that, but it's an extraordinary, that's exactly why I use the phrase. It's the masterpiece of redemptive artistry. God using the situation on the ground, what had been in creation and in process for 300 years since Alexander the Great, using that to get to this point with the propagation of the gospel. It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary, it deserves its own book. I'm not going to write it, but it could be its own book. All right, Lloyd has walked out with the television, so that means we're done. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shut down. Thanks for joining, and we'll do this again some other time.